All right, welcome. Today we're going to talk about gear, my just like personal lessons that I've learned about it over the years, and my personal opinions about it. I'm going to go over my mini modular system you can see here, and some other free alternatives, and just talk about that stuff as today's topic. So yeah, let's get right into it. So first of all, I feel like everyone that gets into music production, finds out pretty quickly that, they hear about hardware, gear, external outboard gear, synthesizers and whatnot, and why that's, become so attractive and it's, so great. And people talk about all the great things, about it, like, oh, it sounds good and whatnot. But yeah, the thing about it is that that's all true, but there's a few caveats and stuff you'd say about gear in general, that I'll just kind of go over the pros and cons and my thoughts about it. So when it comes to external gear in general, but we'll focus on musical instruments in this case, so hardware synthesizers, keyboards, etc., that kind of thing. The obvious advantage of it, the good thing about it, is that it is a physical external thing that you get to play around with. And the fact is that does lead to interesting and unique, it leads to results that are different than if you were playing with a VST or any kind of software tool. Even if it's the same thing, even if you were using, like, say, the VST version of a synth, and then you had the hardware, the physical synth itself, even if you're using the same thing, the results you would get with the physical object itself are going to be different because of just the way that you interact with it that's different. A lot of that has to do with having hands-on control over knobs, buttons, that kind of stuff, versus clicking around with your mouse on a plugin. However, there are ways to work on that issue as well, though, that I'll come back to. But a great option there is you can also use a MIDI controller that has the knobs and buttons and all that stuff, sliders, etc., and just map it really well to your VST instrument, and then that gives you a lot of the same level of hands-on control that you would get in the hardware synth. But there are other just quirks and stuff about a hardware synth, hardware gear, that give it just a unique experience. And in most cases, to a lot of people, that's worth it. The unique feeling of working with a physical instrument, getting your hands on those knobs and keys and stuff, it's a very tactile, obviously, experience, and it produces interesting results as a result, because the way you interact with it is just different than, of course, something on a screen. Now, that's not saying it's just better either. You could do a lot of really incredible stuff just so-called in the box on the computer, and I love it. I love, producing purely digitally, just using VST tools, clicking around on the screen, playing, just hitting keys on my keyboard, the ASDF keys to play some notes and stuff. Like, oh yeah, I do that all the time. I mean, that's totally, that's totally great and gives its own results. But having external pieces of gear, for sure, will give you just a different experience from that, and can produce some interesting sounds and interesting stuff as a result. That's for sure. The phenomenon of just messing around with a hardware synth or a modular synth or something, and just the stuff that just that just comes out of it almost by accident, or just through the, again, like, use the word phenomenon, because that's kind of like what it's like. Even if you're doing something that's relatively straightforward, like programming a synth like you would a VST, like Serum or something, there's like the phenomenon of just the hardware interaction, where messing around with a hardware synth will just give you just a different result and different experience, than the VST will. So that's the big reason to use them, to use, hardware gear, and of course, just the pleasurable experience of having a real a synth, a hardware thing to play around with. It's a very nice way to make music. Um, so that being said, there are obvious good reasons to use hardware synthesizers, modular synthesizers, etc. Um, Now let's talk about the negative sides, right? Because I believe that's really important to discuss as well. Um, Negative side, cost, obviously. If you're especially starting out trying to make your way in producing music and stuff, blowing all your money on some expensive gear, putting yourself in the financial strain, that kind of thing is, not really recommended as a great way to approach, your artistic career, right? So don't spend money that you can't afford to on gear, thinking you have to, or thinking it's going to make better music for you. And that's the second kind of big topic too, is it's very common, it's like a meme on the internet by now about the guy that's got like every shiny piece of gear, $10,000 worth of musical gear, but, hasn't finished any music or something, right? And, I mean, to be fair, like if that's what you want to do, I mean, some people collect cars and, just really like that. I mean, that's fine, that you can totally do that. You can collect instruments and appreciate them and play with them and just, let that enrich your life and really enjoy it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. It is kind of a tease though about people, who may think that by buying the more expensive gear that it's automatically gonna, make them a better musician or produce better music, right? And I think of course we all intuitively know that that's not true, but maybe not. I mean, for people, they may be thinking, well, if I buy this beautiful synthesizer that costs several $1,000s, I will automatically make really beautiful, great music with it. But, well, no, that's the thing, is that no, you won't actually. You have to still play the instrument. You have to still know what you're doing, be able to coax, good sounds out of it and stuff. And I mean, sure, with a beautiful synth, you can just kind of switch it on and play some stuff and some basic patches and stuff, and even the basic saw wave going through like in unison going through a filter and stuff, filter sweep will sound great, right? But you still have to make the music, right? That's the point, is that people get into that gear trap of thinking that, oh, if I just buy one more piece of gear, then my music career will really take off. And I'm like, no. I mean, I feel like we've all heard those stories too. Plenty of people, famous producers, excellent musicians that have made amazing music with nothing but a busted old laptop, in their mom's house, with like, some simple plugins kind of thing, it's about you and your creative output, right? So the gear won't save you. Now, if you're a creative, talented person and are really passionate about what you're doing, and then you get your hands on some really high quality gear, then, oh yeah, sure, you can have fantastic results, But that's one of the the big negative point about gear in general, music gear, drum machines, samplers, synthesizers, modular synthesizers, etc., anything like that, is that spending the money on the stuff won't make better music for you, right? But it's tempting because, I mean, I'm right there too. Like it's easy to see a beautiful piece of music equipment, a beautiful music instrument, and just you can tell, like, oh man, the amazing sounds you can make with that, and the really beautiful music you'd be capable of making with that. Oh, absolutely, that's totally true. But then again, it comes to like, well, does it make sense? Does it make sense for you to actually buy that? Like, can you afford it? Does it fit into your life? That kind of thing. Like for me personally, I've traveled a lot. So I've slimmed down my music instrument. I had like another, a couple other synths and stuff in the past that I, eventually sold and traded for other stuff, that I've pared down to having a setup that I can travel with. Basically I have this small modular rig here, in this very small case. You can see like, it's quite small, fits in a backpack. And then an Octatrack Electron Octatrack sampler that I use in conjunction with this, synthesizer. And that's my setup basically, and it works for me too because it's a very powerful setup I can do a lot with, and it works well for the music that I'm making with it. But it also is portable for traveling. Like when I've moved around a lot and I travel a lot, so I don't have a dedicated studio that I can just collect gear in. So yeah, so it's not about me, but making sure the gear and the stuff makes sense for your life, right? Um, and of course financially. And then also, there's the thing about like, does the gear make sense for the music you want to make, right? Like, for example, if you really wanted to be a neurofunk drum and bass producer or like a EDM dubstep, style producer, yeah, having outboard gear and synthesizers and stuff can be, great for making any style of music. But the nature of that type of music, like neurofunk, is very detail focused and very, very, what am I saying? It's very focused on detailed and precise sound design, and therefore much of it takes place in the digital environment. Basically, like you're not going to play a live synth. That's the reason you never see like a neurofunk or something, live set with someone playing a synth, live or something. Like, sure, you can make a Reese bass on your synthesizer and play that live, but it's not. It doesn't come out sounding the way that you want it to in a finished product in that genre of music. Meaning, it needs a lot more, just like work and sound design. There's a lot of like resampling and stuff involved, and EQing and all sorts of really kind of very specific editing that goes on. So anyways, just about that, like make sure that you think too, like the gear that you're thinking about makes sense for the kind of music you want to make. For example, I use this modular and the Octatrack a lot, making techno and making certain parts of sounds for genres like drum and bass and dubstep, stuff like that. Sure. And it works really well for some of that. That's for sure. And a lot of it is sampling the sound out of the synthesizer, and then recording it, and then digitally, editing it and stuff, and making it fit the purpose that you need it for. So, yeah. So I guess I'm just saying, just buy gear that makes sense for what you want to do, which is kind of a loose, topic. But anyways, it's yeah, the big thing about, okay, gear, it's good, right? Sounds good. It's shiny. It's fun to play with. It can be inspiring when you play a beautiful instrument. You just start playing with it and you're like, wow, this sounds so great. And, it just makes you, feel inspired and encouraged. Negatives, obviously, it can be an expense financially. It can be a personal burden. Like think, anytime you have to move house or something, now you have to lug that gear around with you. When it's much easier to just pack up your computer, right? Or a MIDI controller. It's not really a reason to not get stuff, but and the big thing about it too really is you can also find yourself drowning in gear. If you buy one thing and then you buy another stuff and you buy other things, then you have all this gear, and that's a lot to learn. It's a lot of new things to learn and become proficient at using as well. So in that case, my advice and my own lessons I've learned is I think it's really good to start small with a piece of gear that makes sense for you in those different ways, and then master it. Become really good at using that. Figure out what is the limit of the best music I can make using just this piece of gear. That's the inherent limitations people like about synthesizers, like the Teenage Engineering OP1 or the I don't know, the other limited and things that are kind of all in one, etc., but very limited like that. They really like the limitations imposed by that because they can work within those constraints. You might have heard that before, that limitations can be good for creativity, which is true. like saying I'm going to make a piece of music using only this one synth, or something. Yeah, great. You can do that. So, starting small with a piece of gear, like say you just, kind of find a hardware, a synth or something that you like, or a drum machine or something you really feel attracted to. And then great, you can get that but then focus on that, really learn that piece of gear inside and out, and become a real master at using it so that you can use 100% of it before you think, oh, I need to get another piece of gear, to go with that or something. Because, when you get that second piece of gear, well, now you have two machines to master, which can take time, I mean, God, every time I've left behind my Octatrack sampler for a while and gone on a trip or something and come back to it, I'm like, okay, God, I have to remember all these shortcut key functions and different stuff like that, and just a lot of details to remember. So because learning a machine can be like learning a program, so there is a learning curve to it, basically. Yeah. Well, with that being said, I guess it's kind of an intro to my thoughts on this stuff, and then let's talk about gear. So, as you can see here, this is my, like I pointed out before, my small modular rig. This is an IntelliGel brand palette case, 62 HP. HP are the little, you can see in this empty spot here, the little screw holes across the top, and that's how you measure how wide a module is how many of those spaces it takes up. And that's how you plan out, you figure out what modules can fit in your case here. There's a very good website for doing that called Modular Grid that I will bring up here quick and show that. Kind of forgot about that, but yeah, Modular Grid. And see, there you go. There's my rack with, potential other, you can search for modules on this site and then put them in here and plan your rack, essentially. So yeah, that's just a side note. That's a really good resource for this stuff, Modular Grid, like it says up here. And yeah, so there's that spacing in the case that limits what modules you can fit inside it. And then modules, all being these individual little machines you can see, of course, and being called a modular synthesizer, right? Not going to go too much into the history of it, but a German guy, Dieter Doepfer, he still has a Doepfer, Doepfer, modular company that he helped popularize and kind of bring back the popularity of the Eurorack, what's called the Eurorack format for modular, meaning this is the size of these modules and how big they are is called the Eurorack format, which is it's just a size standard that everyone uses for this Eurorack modular synths now, but that's opposed to large format, or the Moog modular format, where they had modules that were quite large, and that's just a different thing. So anyways, this is Eurorack. This is the real common one that you see people using. Some people use there's the Buchla and Moog modulars as well, but those are less common. And so the Eurorack formula, you can see all the modules are the same size, and they all have a, like I said, a certain HP width that fits into the case here. And all the modules do something, right? And so the thing to understand about that is that this is just the same as your VST synths, meaning that all the modules like these do, the same musical functions that VSTs do. Like you have your sequencer. This is the sequencer here. Your oscillators, your LFOs and envelopes here, your filters and effects, and yeah, you have all of those same building blocks of synthesis that I've covered in the synthesis lesson before, just in a individual hardware format. And that's what makes modular appealing, is that unlike a synthesizer, like a keyboard synthesizer you buy, and it has all those same parts because that's what you need to make a synth. You know, you need an oscillator, a sound source, and a filter, and a VCA, you know, an amp for it, and etc. But with the modular, you can mix and match all the different modules to make, you know, the format, that the layout that you want. And that's really fun. And as you can see, there's a lot of stuff to get your hands on, lots of knobs, lots of buttons. This is a very compact version because, like I explained, I built it into a smaller format that I could, you know, put in a backpack and travel with and stuff. And so I made a very condensed, very small format for the functions that I wanted in this system, which is, we'll start from the top left here. So this is a module that takes a MIDI, you can see it says MIDI here actually, that takes a MIDI input. There's actually, yeah, here I can just kind of, I don't have it hooked up right now, but you can see there's this MIDI cable that goes down to a 1/8 inch TRS cable that plugs in to MIDI input like that. And then I can use MIDI from a source to clock this, to send it the BPM trigger, you know, or and all the other send it MIDI notes, etc., all the MIDI information. So I use that coming from the Octatrack, which I have being clocked from Ableton. So you can see here in the top right here, I'm just gonna close that so you can see it a little easier. You can see this bright pink external instrument channel. This is where I have an external instrument, which you can find in the instruments here. External instrument. I have an external instrument here that is going to my sound card here, and then being sent out to the MIDI channel, and then it's sending sending a clock signal, just a MIDI note, just triggering over and over again. So that MIDI clock, it's you know, the BPM clock, it's called, is being sent to the Octatrack in my setup, which I'm just not including in this case for simplicity. And then that gets passed through to the modular so that it's all synced with Ableton, so that when I record stuff and play stuff, it all, you know, is, yeah, tempo synced and all that. And you can send other MIDI information from here. If you can see, oh, the focus isn't that great on it. It's okay, right? You can see it says gate on the bottom and CV. So in the modular synth world, CV is notes or voltage. It stands for control voltage, because all of these modules are using electricity, right? Even if they're digital. So they are broken into the 12 steps of the Western Common Musical Scale. The 12 notes of the scale respond to 12 volts, to 12 to the voltage range of the electrical system of the synthesizer. So that's how it passes on note information. Basically, pitch information is from a voltage level. And then the gate is the gate is just an on and off signal, you know. The gate is just like, the gate is like you pressing the key and triggering, okay, key on, key off, key on, key off. And then the CV, the control voltage, is what note you're playing on the keys, let's say, like that. So when I send the MIDI clock into this, then I can use MIDI notes on the computer or a MIDI keyboard or something, and I can send that MIDI and I can send that CV and gate signal out into the, you know, and use in the modular if I want. But in this case, you know, for simple demonstration, I mean, generally I actually just use, most of the time I use the sequencer here. So this is the sequencer that will send, again, CV and gate signals to use in the system. And this sequencer has the ability to split it up into 2 channels of CV and gate, and then another CV and gate, so that I can simultaneously play 2 voices using the sequencer. And I generally have this modular setup to play 2 voicings at once, because I have the CV and gate twice in the sequencer. And then I have two oscillators here and here. And then I have two envelopes here and here. And then I have two filters here and here. And then I have two output or two VCAs and two output methods here. So I can play two parts simultaneously on this, which is what I like to do. I will, get some tune going, get a jam going, and then make one part that fits, make one part for it and then make another part. And then I'll record those independently into Ableton and, actually make my song that way. So the sequencer, you can see, has these sliders on it, and that allows you to change a number of functions. I'm going to change that tempo. That you can select like the note, and then you can adjust the notes using these sliders. So this is just one of the examples of having, hands-on control of an instrument, which is really nice because you can see how quick and easy it is to just intuitive to just kind of whatever randomly I can push these around and make a melody, and change it and change the different things I'm sequencing using these sliders just physically like that, which is very fast, convenient, and fun, and provides for a good degree of randomness too, where you just can move these sliders around and be like, oh, that sounds good, oh, maybe I just said, oh, that sounds nice, kind of thing. Which again is the same as just dragging MIDI notes around in the MIDI piano roll in your DAW. It's the same thing, just in a hardware format. So that's a sequencer, and yes, of course, sequencers exist in the VST world too, digitally. You can, like I said, the MIDI notes you program into the piano roll, like this stuff here, in Ableton, the piano roll, and these notes you play in here, you trigger in here. This is a sequencer. It's the same thing. It's sending what would be, the CV, the note CV, and the gate, note on and off function, just together in the same note. And there are other sequencer VSTs you can get that, run as their own plugin that kind of emulate the same as, having like a sequencer where you can program in a way like that. Which can also provide a really good degree of that same inspiration and kind of playing around, an intuitive, fun feeling of using a sequencer in a VST format as well too. So, anyways, moving on. Next, I got this tiny module that fits in here. This is a sampler. It has a SD card here. I can pull out. It's a little SD card that I load with samples in my computer and then put in there, and then it plays back in the modular, the same as that we have a volt per octave for the pitch or the note function, and then another one that triggers the sample, or you have a trigger button as well here you can press. That is, I have drum samples loaded on that. I'll just show. So I plug in, well, okay, don't want to get ahead of myself, but so as you can see, there are all these cables, patch cables, and little, sockets that go in. So that's the thing about a modular, right, is that all these modules are separate, and you need to patch them together using these cables to connect them. And that is just as simple as it sounds. You just plug one in to the other, and you're physically making the connections that exist in the model of synthesis that I've covered before, where you have a oscillator making the sound, generally going into a filter, being controlled by an envelope that is shaping the length and the shape of the sound, and then going into an amp that is amplifying it, giving it the volume that you desire, and then going into an effects unit. It's the same flow from start to finish of a synthesis, of doing synthesis, although now we're just making the connections ourselves using the cables. So in that case, I mentioned I have this sampler here, and here's the output for it. So I'll plug the out of the sampler into an in of the filter here, and then plug the output of the filter into the FX unit here. We're just keeping it really simple, just for hearing the sound right away. And then if I press the trigger and turn it up, I I can change the file. Oh, I have to turn the filter up. Oh. Oh. No, I don't know. Why is it so short right now? Wow. Anyways, I mean, I can just demonstrate it with the oscillator next to it. This is an oscillator that has multiple different modes that are all indicated by the lights here. So if I plug it into the output here, just gonna turn this down. Yeah. A lot of just like weird raw noises coming out because we're not, like doing that much, putting that much thought into it. But yeah, another filter. Anyways, I'll show actually patching it in a second too, after I walk through the functions of these modules. Anyways, there's a sampler. I just wasn't feeding it into the envelope and stuff to shape the sound length. But yeah, it plays back samples. I have drum samples on it right now, on this SD card. Then there's an oscillator here that does a bunch of different synthesis models, like FM synthesis, chords, etc., different stuff. Then there's another oscillator here that does a lot of percussive sounds, but can also do other sounds as well. And then this one here is a modulation source that does LFOs, low frequency oscillators, and envelopes as well. So it's your modulation source. It has 4 of them. Well, actually, it has 5. I mean, it actually has like 6 basically. And then there are 2 envelopes next to it here. That again, the envelope is shaping the rise and fall of the sound and shaping the length and the shape of the sound, which is being used to control then the movement of a filter or the amp as well, the VCA. So with modular, there's this CV or a VCA, or the oscillator is called the VCO. That's all voltage controlled because it's being controlled by, like I said, the voltage of the system. So it's an amp, but it's called a VCA because it's a voltage controlled amplifier, or it's an oscillator, but it's called a VCO because it's an amplitude controlled oscillator. So then, the sound going into a filter, being shaped by an envelope, and then going into an FX unit and going out. So if I wanted to patch this then, because patching is the name of making, a synthesis thing. Like I said, it's the same thought process as patching, Serum or any other, synth, because you're doing the same flow of operations here. So first of all, I've got my sequencer, and I can run it here, pressing play. We see, okay, sequencer is running. Then I will take the voltage output and put it into the input for the oscillator here. And then I will take the output of that oscillator and put it into the water cable, put it into the filter, and then the filter I will take out into the VCA, the amp, and then the amp taking out into the FX unit, which then has our line out. You can see here, I have 2 cables going into my sound card from there. So I can hear that is making sound, but then I'm using the trigger on the second channel of the sequencer, again, this voltage and gate pair of the sequencer, using that trigger then to trigger an envelope, which we will then use to shape on the out to shape the filter, control the action of the filter. So filter envelope, just like you'd have in a, in a VST synth, and also shaping the envelope. Yeah. Actually, I'm gonna swap that out and go in channel 1. Then this is why people do get addicted to like modular, because it's like crack that you get to play around with and stuff, and cables and stuff. Okay, so now we have our control voltage, our CV voltage, our note coming from channel 1 going into our oscillator here, and then we have the gate from channel 2 going to the envelope, which is then being used to trigger the filter and the amp. So if we hit play, and turn this up. Okay, first I'm going to turn off the FX, and then I have to control the envelope here. So, if I turn it way down, it just cuts it off completely. But as this is the attack, and this is the decay. And as I turn the decay up, you can hear the sound get a lot longer. The filter control here, the sweep of the filter. And then the pitch of the notes we're making. So if I go to channel 1, go to the note mode, and then I can move these, we're going to just reset all these sliders down to the bottom. And then we start with a root note then. Oh, I have to sync my channels too. So I have to make track 1 is being divided the same way, multiplied the same way. Track 2 is also being divided, multiplied the same way. Okay, now the 2 tracks are synced. Now I gotta multiply them again. Okay. And then the probability of these triggers, I have to set them all the way up so that we hear every one of them. There we go. And then I can change the notes with these sliders. And then each of the different modes of this oscillator has a lot of stuff you can change with it. And I can cycle through different models as well, synthesis models. If I just go to like a plain one here. Yep. I mean, just demonstrating like what it's like patching it, so you can see you get your sequencer going into your oscillator, and then yeah, filters, envelopes, amplitude, output, effects, etc. Yeah, that's showing the just a real brief intro to the workflow of the how the modular works. The same as another synthesizer, you just have to patch it all manually, but then obviously you get a lot of hands-on control with it, which is fun. I could do a separate whole another session on diving deeper into the modular, because obviously there's a lot you could do with it. But just to make some sounds and show what it's like to get started with that. Pros of a modular synth, obviously they're very fun. There's a lot to play around with. There's a lot of options. You can customize your own synth for your own purposes, because each of these individual modules has like its own kind of special things it does, character it does. Generally, they do a basic function, but with some kind of twist on it, some kind of special, unique thing that it does. And it's up to you to, play Lego with it and build the combination of the ones that you feel like using, which is very fun, very exciting. The downsides, obviously, it's expensive. These modules are not cheap. I mean, this is stuff that I've managed. This is the setup that I've managed to build up, like I said, with the Octatrack, after years of, collecting stuff and buying, selling, saving up, to buy things and all that. But I mean, I started that in 2016. So, it's been 10 years almost, basically. So yeah, it's, not like I just ran out and bought all this right away, day one, and I wouldn't really recommend doing that either. So a really good way to get into it, let's talk about that. Because obviously modular synths, synthesizers, gear, yeah, it's great. It's also expensive, and once you spend your money on stuff, you've committed to it, right? So let's talk about a good way to approach that and how to get into it and all that. I think that, like I said, I think that starting with a piece of gear that works well for you and is not simple in a bad way, but, building some massive modular rig is your first, synthesizer kind of thing. You find a good piece of gear and then really master it. It's a good way to approach it. So a good way to start with that too, some ideas. There are free alternatives, like there's a program called VCV Rack. You can kind of see it down here, like VCV. Again, those C's and V's that, VCV for virtual control voltage rack, which is free. And as you can see, it is like a, oops, I'm gonna move my screen thing a little bit. Hey, now, don't do that. Move it over, there we go. As you can see, it's virtual modular. I mean, there are a lot of, these are all the same modules. Like I said, here's the mixer, here's the envelopes, the VCF, the filter, the voltage control filter, LFO, MIDI to CV, VCO, the voltage controlled oscillator, all that stuff. VCV rack, and there's a few things like it, is a great way. I mean, you can have an unlimited, huge modular synth setup that you play around with the cables. You can patch them, just dragging it around. You can patch it however you want, virtually, and it's free. And then I'm not logged into it, but then, you can get into the stuff, and there's all sorts of different modules you can add, and then you can move them around and do all that, you can change position and stuff. I know my camera's kind of in the way right now. Just to hide that, sorry. Yeah, this is a virtual modular environment, which is really fun and will give you a lot of the same experience of playing with modular synth, aside from, you're obviously not hands-on with it. But otherwise, it, shows you all the same stuff, the signal flow of patching, how you can make really crazy combinations of all sorts of devices put together and stuff. So yeah, VCV Rack, it's free, very good, highly recommended. And there are a few other synthesizers that are either modular or semi-modular, like I think there's a UHE, yeah, this kind of stuff. UHE, Bezial, and there's free versions of it too, but You can see like here, there's the this is a semi-modular synth that has some stuff pre-routed in it, but it also has patch cables you can patch as well. That is modular. And there's also a free version of this too, I believe too. That I'm pretty sure that I could link that. I think I linked that already, but yeah, freeware. Yeah, there's like there's free versions of it that you can download, which is a good way to start getting started and playing around with it as well. Yeah, so there are options to get a taste of what the different methods are like, modular synthesis, etc. What it's like before spending any money on it and committing to stuff, which is a really good option, I think, and definitely the way I would start if I was doing it now. And plus, I mean, hey, you have all these awesome free tools. Like you want to, go nuts, experiment with that stuff. What do you got to lose, right? It just costs nothing. You can learn a lot, do a lot of cool stuff with it. And like I said, I mean, gear is cool, but what else is, what's even cooler is making awesome music on like nothing, like people like Burial and stuff that made, best music of all time on like some crappy old laptop, not even using a real DAW, I mean, that's even cooler, right? In some ways. So yeah, start anywhere, Another good option I mentioned too was you can use a MIDI controller, something like this that has, a lot of knobs and faders on it and stuff. And then you can map all of these things to give you that hands-on control on your VST synthesizer that then you can go hands-on with it. You're not just clicking around anymore, but you can actually twist knobs and move, faders and stuff and control a VST like a real synthesizer. And honestly, that's a really, really good way to get into gear is if you have a MIDI controller, especially one that has a keyboard or even a separate keyboard combined with, some box of knobs like this. And if you have that mapped up in Ableton or, whatever DAW you're using, remember you can use that mapping function very easily where if you just have a synth here and then you want to map it, you go to the MIDI thing up here, you just click MIDI and then any of this stuff, filter, boom, you click on it, filter resonance, click on that. Any of these things, you click on it, and then once it's highlighted with the little box like that, you just touch and move the MIDI control that you want to control that, and it's linked. And simple as that. And then you just exit the MIDI thing, and there you go. Yeah. And so you can map this, and you can map any VST synthesizer, you can map every part of it to a MIDI controller and essentially have, really like the same thing as a hardware synthesizer keyboard, just, in the VST for free on your desk with the MIDI controller. And that gives you really like 99% of that hands-on tactile experience of using hardware gear. The phenomenon of messing around with stuff with your hands and just getting like crazy random results, because you're just twisting knobs and stuff, that can get you there basically. And you can do it for free or very cheap, whatever. If you have a synth, again, that's not like an Ableton one where it's all laid out like that, you could do, say, Serum, and then your synth looks like this, right? Well, then remember, you can open this side button here, and FL Studio and all that has its ways to do it as well. And then there's the configure button, and you just, then you just, everything you touch now, like, I want this knob, I want this thing, I want that thing, and you can see it all pops up there. And then you do your MIDI mapping. Okay, now you can map that, So, yeah, you can map, like you could map a synth like Serum or anything, or Vital for free, and map it to your MIDI controller and have complete control over it, just like a hardware synthesizer, So, okay, and that's very true. However, obviously people know, well, yeah, but an analog synthesizer, especially an analog one, is different, right? Well, yeah, of course it is. It's just different having a, physical piece of gear there in front of you, not worried about the screen and all that, but honestly, that's very true and very important, but it's not a deal breaker. It's not major in that sense. It's nice if you have it, and if you don't have it, no problem. The thing, of course, is that an analog synthesizer, as opposed to a digital one, I've kind of talked about this before, but an analog oscillator is using an actual electricity, an actual electrical signal, just like out of the socket of your wall, and oscillating it, spinning it until it reaches a rate that is fast enough, oscillating fast enough that it actually produces sound, or at least what we experience with our ears as sound. And an analog circuitry doing that with actual electricity rather than the approximation of it with digital bits, ones and zeros, etc., that is different. It is different in the same way that digital photography with pixels is different than a film camera using analog film exposed to light, right? Do they achieve the same results? Yes, basically. But also, no, because the analog and the digital thing are always going to be a little bit different because they have different characteristics, mainly because the digital is always exact. It's always, well, it's either a 1 or 0, it's on or off in bits, etc. And every individual bit is controlled. Whereas the real electricity of an analog oscillator is, it's variable because there is that analog, there's that literal bzz, buzz of the electricity in that oscillator and in that circuitry that is never exactly the same every time. So there is that's what the kind of like the warmth or the sound characteristics or whatever that you can tell there's something just a little bit sweet, in an analog synthesizer. And yes, that is true. However, that's like saying, well, 110% is better than 100. It's like, well, yeah, true, but it doesn't mean that the digital version is bad either, So, and again, it's about like your budget and what you want to get into and all that too. Because if you want to go out and buy a great analog synthesizer and learn to use it and stuff, yeah, awesome, by all means. But if you are just trying to stay budget conscious, budget wary, and just make the best music you can with the setup, going digital and starting with these different tools and approaches is a really good way. That being said, there are good budget-friendly options for, like, say, a desktop synthesizer, like one that, say, doesn't have the full keyboard built in, although it is very nice because then to play it, you still have to have a MIDI keyboard. But you can get, cheap synths that are smaller and just, maybe less feature-rich than some other ones and are perfectly great tools to play with and can do a lot with them. And yeah, there are all sorts of levels of entry to the world of gear. The only thing, like I said, to watch out for is got to watch out for the GAS, as they call it, the GAS, the gear acquisition syndrome, where people just get addicted to it, like Modular calling it crack, where you just like, oh, I just got to buy more. And then, oh, I see this new shiny instrument. Oh, I got to have that. And yeah, careful with your money and careful with your time, your focus, your energy. Like I said, start small and keep it simple. And better to have one small piece of gear, but be a total master of it than to have like a whole bunch of stuff and, whatever. So that's kind of my thoughts about the stuff. Yeah. So to recap, basically, gear is great. Gear is great if it's great for you, if you have a sweet synthesizer, but now you're in massive debt, well, that's not great for you, right? And, whatever. So I don't know if I have any questions about any of the stuff. Pretty much covered everything I think about it. The whole journey of gear and synthesizers and stuff, that's a whole nother, yeah, it's not dead, it's building credit, right? yeah, for sure. And hey, it's money well spent, right? So I'm definitely an advocate of it, but yeah, but it's another journey itself too. Like not only learning like a whole new workflow with like modular or something, or whatever. But yeah, collecting gear and all this stuff is a lifetime long process too, just like making music. So, yeah, well, it's probably a topic I'll cover again in the future, but I hope you enjoyed this little intro and, just my thoughts and personal opinions about the hardware experience and that hardware life, certainly is great. But the important thing to remember is that any way that you're making music is great. There's no barrier to making good music. There's nothing that says you have to have cool gear to make, to be cool or make good music. The best stuff is whatever you have. So, yeah. And yeah, again, highly recommended way to get into that is take your favorite synthesizer, and if you have some cheap old MIDI controller, whatever, map everything. Imagine it's like, okay, if this was a hardware synthesizer, I'd have the filter cutoff mapped to this knob, and then the filter resonance mapped to this knob, and all the stuff. Map all those functions to a MIDI controller and then save it. Because then, like in Ableton and other stuff, you can, like I showed, you can have this, and then you can group it into a rack and stuff. And then, well, you can actually hit this button here too. You can save your pre-made mapping of everything so that you don't have to redo it every time, But that is a really great way to get into just getting better at synthesis and having the experience like a, hardware synthesizer, but just via the MIDI controller and the plugin and stuff. And yeah, happy to talk about this stuff as always. If you have any questions, hit me up, and I'll probably do a follow-up with this stuff in the future, go more into depth with different things. So yeah, thanks for tuning in.